All right, we're live. Take it away, Edgar.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Villanueva. I'm Vice President of Programs and Advocacy at the Schott Foundation for Public Education. I want to welcome you to today's conversation. Today we'll be having a second installment of our conversation about inclusive leadership and philanthropy. At the Schott Foundation, our webinars are an opportunity to engage with the movement, with policy and philanthropic leaders to reflect on our progress and also to share stories and to talk about the work that is yet to be done. For 25 years, the Schott Foundation has been a public education fund focused on creating educational opportunity through a four-pronged strategy: funding, narrative change and communications, policy advocacy, and connecting, which is facilitating networking opportunities to build grassroots power. In today's webinar, remember that towards the end, we will leave time for questions. In your chat box on the side, you can post questions there, and we will be feeding those to our facilitator. Please also follow along on Twitter at Schott Foundation. You can tweet your questions there using the hashtag GrassrootsEd. That's GrassrootsED. At this time, I'm very thrilled to pass this over to Toya Randall, who welcome back Toya. And we appreciate our partnership with the Casey Family Programs, thinking about inclusive philanthropic leadership. So Toya will moderate our conversation and introduce our guests. Thanks, Toya.
Awesome, thanks, Edward. And thank you everyone for joining us for this second conversation about the importance of inclusive leadership in philanthropy. We have a dynamic panel with us today. These four individuals represent what I believe is the promise of inclusive philanthropy, and they're going to share experiences from their leadership journey as well as offer advice for folks who are on a similar path. So we have with us Trista Harris, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Council on Foundations, Kima Robinson, Principal with Converge Consulting, Will Cordery, who is a program officer with Wellspring Advisors in their racial justice program, and Sana Jafri, who's a program officer for The Hive, a funders collaborative housed at the Chicago Community Trust. So we're going to jump right in and spend about 30 minutes in conversation with these brilliant leaders, and then open it up for conversation and questions with our audience. So I'm going to jump in and ask that you each spend a minute just talking about your work and your role in philanthropy and how you navigate your responsibilities and your relationships and your leadership platform in a field where issues and challenges with race continues to be something that folks are uncomfortable with, and that continues to be at the forefront of so many of the issues that we're trying to address with our funding. So take about a minute. We'll start with Trista, and then Sana, you can go next with Will, and then we'll wrap it up with Takema. So Trista, take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Toya. I appreciate it. Happy to be here. I'm Trista Harris, President of the Minnesota Council on Foundations. We are a network of 180 foundations that give away about $1.5 billion a year. And our role is to help those foundations be more effective as they do their work. So when I think about leadership, it's really about the leadership pipeline and ensuring that we've got a strong group of leaders, and especially leaders of color, that are ready to do the good work in philanthropy. I think the other piece is really authentic leadership, and so making sure that I understand how my staff want to grow. What's that job that they want to have 20 years into the future, or what's the side hustle that they have today, and how do we harness some of those pieces to help them be successful and really fulfilled in the work that they do.
Thanks, Trista. Sana?
Thank you, Toya. Thank you first off to the Schott Foundation for Public Education for putting together this webinar, and thank you to Toya and Edgar for bringing us together around this important topic. So my work is with the Hive Chicago Fund for Connected Learning at the Chicago Community Trust, and we are, as Toya mentioned, a funder collaborative. We focus on reimagining learning, and what that means is traditional education focuses on teacher-led learning. We try to change that paradigm and make it more learner-centered. So we mainly work in the out-of-school time space and provide support to after-school programs and out-of-school time providers, but we are also thinking about the in-school space. So I'm excited to talk about how that work intersects with my role as an inclusive leader and also kind of recipient of inclusive leadership. I think Toya's question was around race specifically. As a person of color, it's something that I still struggle with. I don't think I have all the answers, but I did recently go through a fellowship that was instrumental in my development, which was part of the Funders Network for Smart Growth, their Places Fellowship, that helped me give some tools around how to navigate the field of philanthropy, which we know is a very white, traditionally white dominant field and historically and continues to be. So how do I continue to build power and build resources to help my grantees and partners in this work? I don't think I have all the answers, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists as well.
Thanks, Sana. Will?
Hi. Well, thank you, Toya, and thank you, Edgar, for curating the space here today and for getting us all together for this conversation. So I am Will Cordery. I am the Program Officer for the Racial Justice Program here at Wellspring Advisors. And it's an emerging program that we are building in real time. For those who don't know, Wellspring Advisors is a philanthropic advisory firm that moves grant investment both domestically and globally. And with the racial justice program that is coming online, it really has been inspired by the work that we've seen around racial justice, both kind of criminalization as well as power building over the last 3-4 years. And so I'm here helping to build that out. I have to say that Wellspring knew the importance of investing in this work at this time, and also is very intentional about who they hired, folks who've obviously worked around criminalization and around racial justice issues, but are also people of color to help lead the racial justice program and to help shape it in this early formation. And so I'm very excited to be here, part of this conversation. I think we'll touch on a lot of different topics when it relates to leadership. For me, there are several things that are critically important to being or creating space for inclusive leadership, one of which is just creating that space for folks to lead. Another is just the encouragement for emerging leaders like ourselves to actually have a vision. If there's no space to actually created for us to harness and develop our own vision, it's kind of hard to get the most out of an individual to develop in their own individual leadership in a way that reflects the work of the whole. And another thing, which I'm probably at my minute, but I hope we get into, there's something around a shared mission that I think both kind of our directors or supervisors and direct reports need to have in order to be effective in our work together. If we are not on the same page around what we're here to accomplish or why this work matters, I don't think we'll go very far. So I'll stop there and I'll come back to it later on.
Thanks, and we'll wrap this question up with Takema.
Thank you, Toya. So again, my name is Kima Robinson, and I am the founder and principal of Converge, a consulting firm that supports philanthropy and social justice organizations. We are based in the South, actually based in New Orleans. And so I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. I have been the recipient of the mentoring and the sponsoring of many, I think, of the field's greatest inclusive leaders. And so they have definitely poured quite a bit into me. And I think as I reflect on my own leadership, as I lead an organization, I think about many of those lessons that I inherited, and I hope we get a chance to talk a lot about that. As we also think about leadership and race as it relates to this field, I think we have to quickly recognize that this is a field that is really definitely dominated by a sort of a white cultural narrative, and the ways in which the institutions that many folks work in or work with have been set up by that dominant narrative. And so trying to navigate that as a person of color, particularly a person of color committed to social justice, is a challenge. And we need to really think about the tools that we bring to that challenge. I will say one of those things that have supported me most is definitely being parts of networks, being the recipient of fellowship opportunities that allow me to build out that network and to be in relationship to you all who I'm presenting with on this panel, and many of the folks who I know are out there and part of the larger conversation. But a big piece of supporting inclusive leadership is creating that space and creating space for us to be in relationship with one another as we do this work in the field. So I'll stop there, and then we can start the conversation.
So thank you all for staying within your minute and really sort of setting up, I think, this next question, because you each talked about your experiences within this field, right? That is sort of was built in the image of white folks and wealth and in a very traditional construct. And so, Trista, you talked about leadership pipeline. Sana, you talked about in your work, you are reimagining, right, how children learn and the sort of spaces and places where that happens. And so how would you guys advise or promote what needs to change with leadership and philanthropy? Like if we could reimagine this field, what would it look like given the sort of issues and challenges with race that we face as a field, but particularly as leaders of color who embody, values and strong beliefs and commitment to inclusion and justice and equity. So how should we reimagine the field and the work? And so let's start with Sana.
Thank you, Toya. I love this question. We're all about reimagining education to be less teacher-centered and be more learner-centered. So let's reimagine the field that we also work in. And I think it's, I don't think there's one answer, but I think in my own organization, one thing that's helped with us as a team and helping us drive our work is to have more distributed leadership. And I think philanthropy is traditional in its sense. It's slow moving. It's has kind of these norms that are followed, but it continues to want to innovate and change and ultimately make change and make the world a better place, like love of people, right? Philanthropy. But we have to change as people ourselves. And so I think distributed leadership is a skill and also a trait that I've seen in my own organization that's helped us grow and kind of advance our work. And I think one example from the for-profit sector, which, the tech sector has also got its own issues, but Google has a really interesting policy that helps kind of foster distributed leadership. It has a 70-20-10 rule. And what that means is that you work 70% of your time on, your day-to-day job, 20% on off-budget projects, and then 10% of your time on, things to reimagine your work or do better. And everyone's voice is heard at the table. And a lot of Google's products have been part of the process, have emerged from that process. So I think that philanthropy can learn a lot and hopefully be more innovative and more nimble as a result if it can shed its hierarchical nature, which is seems to be very inherent. I'm the CEO, president, et cetera, program officer, program associate, and titles seem to really matter when I don't think they should matter. We're all working towards the same mission.
Thanks, Sana. Does anybody else have examples of distributed leadership within philanthropy? Are there models out there? Takema, Trista, or Will?
I'll just say really quick, I think part of it is just leading where you're at. So I think for a lot of people early in their careers, they say, I'll lead once I have a leadership position. And you don't get that leadership position unless you can show that you can lead. And so being willing to raise your hand and say, I'm willing to lead this assignment, I'm willing to move this process forward, ensures that there's a lot of voices heard around the table.
I would also add that those of us who have emerged into positions of leadership need to be mindful of how that happened for us, and really willing to take risk and to bring folks along. I know in the model that we've created at the Greater New Orleans Funders Network, which Converge manages, you know, we're very intentional about making sure we have multiple tiers of leadership, and always looking to rotate leaders, to bring new voices, always mindful of opportunities to let new people shine, and, you know, to create opportunities for folks to have vision, and to sort of lead in that vision. And so I would say, you know, that's something that we tried to do very, very intentionally, and have actually built that into our model.
Will, can you speak to this point that you made about having a shared mission and sort of being on the same page? And when we were prepping for this conversation, there was an example of how, or a question about how do you work with colleagues and partners within your organization or within work environments that pride themselves on being inclusive, but perhaps may not exhibit that leadership style or those sort of attributes all the time. So we may say that we have a shared mission, but when the rubber hits the road, that isn't always the case. So how do you sort of navigate some of those issues?
Yeah, no, it's, thank you for asking that question. I think for some of us who have ended up in this work, we often have approached it, I personally have approached it as a job that I am here to do in service of the community that I come from. I used to be a fundraiser with community-based organizations in the South and did a lot of work around racial and economic justice work. And I had a lot of challenges when it came to working with and understanding institutional philanthropy. And so when I got in it, you know, I wanted to approach things differently. And I knew that if I were to be a funder as opposed to a grassroots fundraiser, that I had a very large responsibility on my shoulders, and that I, again, was to be here in service of the communities rather than to be very critical and to be kind of divorced from community. And I think what happens, what can happen, particularly to emerging folks of color as we emerge in this field, that again, as that's been mentioned, is not really built for us, is that we sometimes are in institutions that kind of, I don't know if it's lose sight of that, or rather that we're so focused on being institutions that we lose the personal and we lose the human that is related to all of this work. And it's really helpful. It's been helpful in previous jobs and in this job to always come back to my colleagues and to create a space where we are talking about what brought us to this work, what brings us to the office every day, what sends us out into the community to figure out how we can most effectively move resources and be of service to that community. What is the bigger picture beyond just the money that we are responsible for? And you know, while I had the mic, to answer your earlier question more broadly about kind of how do we reimagine inclusive leadership, I think that there's something that happens for people of color in this field where we end up leading from trauma and a fear of scarcity. And it's so much bigger than us. It has to do with the nature of philanthropy itself. It has to do with the fact that we are working in institutions that are largely white and the wealth is almost never ours. But yet we have been given the authority and have been put in positions to determine where these very critical resources go. And so with that comes some really kind of uneasy culture that can be developed between folks inside of institutions. And if you happen to be in an institution where there's more than one person of color and you know, you happen to end up in a situation where you're both kind of almost like competing for airtime because it seems like there's not enough room for more than one person of color or more than one woman or more than one queer person's voice at the table, that is inherently wrong. And again, it's not a reflection of us as individuals. It has something to do with the system itself that we are operating within. And so in terms of what we can do to reimagine it, I think that one, we have to acknowledge that it is a thing. And two, build the kind of personal and political trust that we need to have in order to do this job effectively. And to understand that, like, look, we all have a responsibility, we have an opportunity, and we've been given a great kind of privilege to do this work, but we also have a responsibility to bring folks behind with us, to have a purpose and be centered in a mission that's bigger than us, and even maybe bigger than our program strategies or our organizations, and then, you know, work from that place in order to be the most effective that we can be.
Thank you for that. So Trista or Takema, do one of you want to talk about how you build the personal and political trust that Will is talking about, particularly as people of color? I mean, our percentages aren't great, but they're higher than they've ever been in this particular field, right? So our representation continues to grow. But this idea of internalized oppression and how it plays out in our interactions with one another. So building the trust and the sort of relational sort of capital that helps us move and heal beyond that. Do you all have any advice and or tools to offer?
So I'll start. I would say, you know, the personal and political trust amongst colleagues, definitely. And I will go back to those spaces where we get to gather and network and build relationship. Again, whether they're fellowship programs or finding ourselves in the same place at the same time and building out those relationships. I think, that has been how that I've both, built my personal reputation, that's where my relationships get formed in this work, finding my tribe. You've got to find your tribe. Of course, I'm an APFI fellow, and there are many people also in this moment in philanthropy that I've known before I even entered the field. We were colleagues in the organizing field. I would also say for particularly for those of us who do social justice work, it's important that we consider our colleagues, not just the folks who are inside the formal field of philanthropy, but we've got to be in relationship and really an accountable relationship to those folks outside the field, to Will's point, that we are serving. And so, the accountability, the trust, the political trust comes from being in relationship, and it comes from being in accountable relationships where folks can call you out or call you in. It also means doing what you say you're going to do. I think part of that is also remembering, particularly at the PO level, right? There are limitations to what your power is in those spaces, but folks need to be able to count on you to be consistent outside of the institution and inside of the institution. And that comes with time, and that comes with, showing and proving. And so I think, personal and political trust is built in relationship, and we find ourselves in relationship in time and space, and then over time by proving who we are. And so integrity is what builds that personal and political trust over time.
To Kima's point, I think it's really important that community is not only seeing you during a site visit, that you actually have a relationship and connections. And then on the piece of taking care of yourself, people really come into these roles with trauma. And when you're in philanthropy, all of a sudden you're smarter, prettier, and funnier than you ever have been before because you have access to money. And if you don't have a tribe and network of people around you that can call you on your stuff, it really goes to your head really quickly. And so making sure that you're developing a network of support where people are holding you accountable, you're feeling supported, but also getting that push that's really necessary, I think helps a ton in these roles.
So the topic of accountability and integrity was trended huge in the first webinar. Can you all talk about, and Sana, we'll start with you, how do you hold yourself accountable? Like where do you go, or who do you sort of look to help you stay accountable, to help you sort of navigate the role within the foundation and the role within community with integrity and transparency, and in service of, right, the folk and the sort of spaces and places in community that our resources are being marshaled to support?
Thanks, Toya. I think, you know, what Trista mentioned around, you know, being with community, and I think is key to helping you be accountable. So, you know, just being true to people, and hopefully they'll be true to you as well. And so, you know, finding those folks that will hopefully not just laugh at all your jokes and will give you kind of the real deal as to what's going on with their organization, themselves, and also not just seeing it from the work. I think oftentimes, you know, yes, the work is important, but there's people behind the work. And so, you know, asking about their kids or their families, and making sure you're checking in and being there. And so also, you know, and hopefully they will be there for you. And I think, as Kima mentioned, the relationships, you know, having those relationships where, you know, perhaps someone is going to throw you a little shade, and that's okay. You know, a little friendly teasing is important, and can help you grow if you see it as if you built that relationship, whereas it's a point of growth rather than, you know, just criticism.
So Toya's on mute, but while she's on mute, I'm going to take this opportunity to say something as well.
That's leadership at its best. Go well.
No, the only thing I will add is that, you know how, like, I imagine most of us on this call have somebody in our family, an auntie, a grandmama, an uncle, somebody who can just look at you and notice something's not right, or know that you need to fess up to something, or know that you hiding something, or know that you just ain't doing what you're supposed to be doing. I think we need that in philanthropy. We need people, to Kima's point, we need people who don't mind telling you that your stuff stinks. They don't mind telling you that, you know, you're not acting right. We need people to actually hold us accountable, and whether that is our squads of folks outside of institutions, or folks that are organizers, or folks in relationship to community. There needs to be a constellation of folks outside of these institutions that we are held accountable to and have built relationship with. Yeah, so that's it. You can take it back, Toya.
Thanks, Will. So, you know, you've provided a great segue into the next question. You all have talked about, like, where your community exists, internal and external, that you find in your tribe, and these sort of spaces and places, whether it be through fellowships or other sort of professional development opportunities that are formal or informal. And so for folks who are, say, trying to get to where you are, but don't necessarily have supportive environments that allow, either through the permission of space and time, or the allocation of financial resources, right, to take advantage of some of the things you've described, where do those folk go to grow and get support and find their tribe?
So if I can jump in, I was that person, and I think I feel blessed to be in a place where I am supported now. But you know, in my previous positions, I was, you know, working with a person that was, I would define as the absence of an inclusive leader, or like non-inclusive. And so, you know, it was really hard and you know, just physically exhausting. You know, I love the work actually, but I just didn't, the team was a little toxic. And so I think finding folks outside of your immediate work environment, if they're not supportive, is really important. So if you have, I was part of the Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy. There wasn't actually a Chicago chapter at that point in time. It was around 2011. But I found this group, and I went to the conference, and I think I paid for it myself, because it was something that really mattered to me. Or I think that, and I also applied, actually, correction, I applied for a scholarship, and they had a scholarship. And so I was able to receive funds to go to the conference, and I was able to find my tribe, and folks that I really felt like were going to be in kind of a similar boat. But know that it's a moment in time, and you're going to learn from that moment in time, and it's going to be hard in the moment for sure. But there is hopefully a light at the end of the tunnel, and there are lots of resources, especially within philanthropy and in the nonprofit sector, where you can kind of, if you're a little resourceful, find opportunities as well.
Does anybody else want to add, Trista?
Yeah, I'll just add to that piece. Shameless self-promotion. Rosetta Thurman and I wrote a book called How to Become a Nonprofit Rockstar about the free ways that you can develop yourself, because both of us felt 100% underinvested in our organizations. And so waiting to have the sort of professional development where you can go to conferences and you can be part of networks just was not going to happen. And we got advice from lots of great professionals, both through the Emerging Practitioners and Philanthropy Network and the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, that was really about how to kind of hustle and find your people and connect, and find 5 people from different organizations to have lunch with once a month to talk through common issues, or find the national networks that have the scholarship or that do the free webinars. Professional development is really something that each of us is responsible for. It's nobody has the magic boss that says, I'm going to make all your professional development dreams come true. So you really have to develop those things for yourself to be successful in this field.
Does anyone else want to add before I go to the next question? Advice for folks who will?
Yeah, no, thank you, Trista. The only thing I would add is, one, I would echo the importance of seeking out kind of both personal and professional development opportunities. But it's also so critically important for your leadership, your supervisor, whomever, who is creating this culture of inclusive leadership. It's important for them to support your efforts in doing that. If you have to beg a supervisor or president for support to pursue a development opportunity, whether it's professional development or personal or professional, chances are you're not in an environment that's going to support your leadership growth. And so I just wanted to emphasize that. I've had all types of opportunities with different types of leaders, and I've had a couple who've been really intentional about sitting down with me and saying, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How can I help you get there? And those have been the most fruitful.
So this will be the last question before we turn it over to the audience. We've got some good questions coming from folks who are watching. Why do you all stay? There are lots of challenges. Folks have described philanthropy as a toxic environment that is rich with traumatic experiences and oppression and racism. But we wake up and we do it every day. And so can you guys talk about, you've talked a lot about how you sustain yourselves, how you hold yourselves accountable, but why do you stay? So let's start with Takema.
Sure. So I have one foot in and one foot out. I created and I founded and started my own firm. But about 60% of our clients are philanthropy, and we run the Greater New Orleans Funders Network. And strategically for me, I am committed to driving more resources to our communities. That is the end all be all. And so if ever I have a day when I want to take my bike and go home, take my marbles and go home, I remember to the point that Will made earlier, right? Like, I'm a servant leader, and I was sent and positioned in this role, in this time, in this place for a reason, right? That, all of the years of professional experience and relationships have positioned me here in this time. And so, it is important that, I stand here as a gatekeeper, which I clearly am, and to try and hold that gate open as far and wide as I can to bring more resources to the good work that folks are doing on the front lines for our communities. So that's always the beginning and the end, even when it gets tough. What keeps me and sustains me is my tribe. Is knowing that other folks have my back and other folks are doing that work as well. For folks I can turn to for encouragement, folks I can turn to for strategy, folks I can partner with, folks I can turn to for cover, folks who can block for me when I can't have the conversation, but they can, and we can play kind of positional chess. So, what keeps me, what sustains me is reminding myself that I've been positioned here for a reason. And that my goal and my job is to get as many resources out the door to the folks who are doing the frontline work. And that is what my job is.
Okay. Sana?
I think Takema said it well. I think similarly, and as Will mentioned, it's the coming to work from the point of service and serving community. And so it's not really about me, it's about the community. And, I think, yes, any job can be hard and philanthropy can be at times difficult, but, I think for me, it's about the work and putting the work before me and before me, and making sure to have, my friend says, like, organizing resources. So I'm not necessarily organizing people, but I'm organizing resources in service of community. And so how can we do that? I mean, I'm going to continue to do that as long as I can. And it's also, working in philanthropy is also a point of privilege and understanding that and making sure to check myself, during that process. And so, we've talked a lot about that today, and making sure I'm staying true to that, because if I'm not, then maybe I'm not the best person to be doing the work.
Will, you're itching to get in.
Well, ditto to everything that has been said. And Toya, your kind of lead into this question was, the fact that we've kind of talked about some of the challenges in these institutions and the challenges filled with oppression and racism. But the truth is the world is filled with oppression and racism. And to my colleague's point, we are here for something in service of something greater. I think that this work is also very rewarding. And this is, the question that you're asking us is a question that frontline community organizers ask themselves every day when they go to Capitol Hill, or they go to DC, or they go to a meeting or a rally, or they see white people with tiki torches. They ask themselves every single day, why do I keep doing this work? And it's because, one, the work needs to get done. Secondly, the work, when we win, we are, it's huge, right? The work itself is rewarding and the wins are rewarding. And we're here for something that is much bigger than all of us, larger than any institution, larger than any organization, even larger than any one particular social movement. I think we are here for a lot of the same reasons that community organizers are here. And that's to bring about fundamental change and to create the space for the liberation of folks in oppression for all of our peoples. And so that's what keeps me coming in every day, on top of the work itself being rewarding and being able to kind of see the tangible impact that we can have as social justice funders in this space. But yeah, so I'll stop there.
Trista?
Yeah, I have friends that make widgets for a living. So the idea that we get to get up every single day and make the world a better place, what a fantastic opportunity that is. And I think often we feel so many steps away from the action, But when those wins happen in your day-to-day life, you can feel that change and see that difference in the communities that we care about. So I think it's exhausting, it's hard, it's a privilege to be in these spaces. We know how to use a really specific, effective tool. And if you're good at using that tool, then use it to make the world a better place.
Awesome. So we're going to move into some questions from the audience. And we're going to say goodbye to Sana because she has an important meeting that she needs to be in. So thank you, Sana, for taking some time to spend with us today. We really appreciate having your voice in the conversation. So everybody, let's say goodbye to Sana.
Bye, all. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Right, you too. So, Will, I think in your response, you talked about sort of philanthropy and some of the experiences dealing with oppression and racism not being very different from sort of the day-to-day experience of people of color in America. So can you all talk about, in your view, what is philanthropy's role in dismantling white supremacy? Trista, don't all jump in at once.
Throw out the hardest possible question. We're sitting in these institutions that are 100% built on racism and inequality, and we're supposed to fix that issue. So I think that philanthropy can be a powerful tool. As we work with nonprofit organizations, the questions that we ask guide changes within institutions. So when I started my career and I was a fundraiser, one of our foundations asked us just to list the demographics of our senior staff and our volunteers. And as the grant writer asking that question of our HR staff and them saying, well, what's going on? Why are you asking that question? I'm like, the foundation needs it. It wasn't it needs to look exactly like this, but it was just merely asking the question, led to board conversations, led to new staffing, led to changes in how we were managing our volunteer program. The ripple effect was amazing. So I think we have a lot of opportunity in the field to chip away at the thing that created us.
Will?
The revolution will not be funded. So, and I actually do mean that. I think that we are here in these roles to help create the conditions for fundamental change work and for revolutionary change that brings about the liberation of oppressed people. It will not all happen in a succinctly written grant deliverable. It will not happen within even a multi-year grant term. It won't even happen with like the kind of most robust and kind of well-intentioned funders collaborative. Again, we have an opportunity to move resources inside of institutions that have them to help create the conditions and to help support the pipelines of leadership to make the real fundamental work happen. But it will not happen inside of these institutions or solely because of these institutions. And so, yeah. In many ways, Toya, you let the cat out of the bag by even asking the question. But yeah, so I'll stop there.
Takema.
Yeah. So I appreciate that piece around we create the conditions, because I don't think, to Will's point, that the grant is going to deliver the sort of wholesale social change. The other thing, though, is that I think, as much as philanthropy can ask really good questions of grantees, we need to ask the same questions about ourselves, right? And so we're really good about asking other folks about these things and holding other people accountable to terms like equity, racial inclusion, et cetera. How good are we as a field at actually living and internalizing those same kind of values and practices? So I challenge the field to do as much of that to turn those questions back on itself. And I do think those of us who are positioned inside of the field need to, you know, definitely push as much as we can and where and how we can to get our own institutions to align with those same values that we ask our grantees to be held accountable to. So, you know, equity, inclusion, those things have to be more than statements on papers and press releases about DACA. They have to actually materialize in our practices. We need to see those values reflected on the boards of these institutions. We need to see those values reflected in terms of who is on staff and who is staffing these institutions. So hopefully more of us. We see more of us in the space. We also have to really look at where we are also, how we are practicing that in terms of the grant making. We know that historically philanthropy underfunds Black-led, people of color-led work. We know that we often underfund community organizing over policy advocacy, even on the social justice end of the spectrum. So I think we need to do a lot more question asking of the field, and there needs to be a lot more accountability. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have is who holds philanthropy accountable. And so, you know, those of us who are holding ourselves accountable and who are being held accountable by the communities we come from, I think it is actually incumbent upon us and those who call themselves allies to raise these questions and raise these issues and really move some of these overused words like equity into practice.
So this really is a question that came up in this thread of questions from audience members. So who does hold philanthropy accountable, right? We've seen many instances in, again, the corporate sector where, you know, campaigns or social media, you know, hashtags have driven, you know, the ouster of CEOs, reform of certain policies and practices, but there's never been that type of sort of movement or momentum in philanthropy to sort of drive some of the conversation points that you guys are talking about as it relates to who gets hired, right? Who gets on boards of directors. It is still representative of the sort of dominant culture that originally envisioned this field. So who holds philanthropy accountable, or how do we hold philanthropy accountable?
As the representative from one of the regional associations, I think one of the tools that we have in philanthropy is peer accountability. So we've really, out of the sort of tax acts in the 1960s, there was a feeling in the community that, you know, who are these foundations and what are they doing? And let's make sure that we have more legislation. And what the foundation said is, we will hold each other accountable. And I've seen lots of examples of where that happens, where NCRP's philanthropy at its best. Most of the regional associations have sort of principles and practices for foundations about what best practices look like. And I know many of us have seen examples during the election cycle and other times where you go, that's not a foundation. So there's a sort of feeling of, here's what good practice is and here's what bad practice is. And I think for some of the foundations, that peer pressure really encourages people to stay on the path. I think that there's been efforts to try to legislate what philanthropy practice looks like. And it's difficult because every foundation is so different. We have operating foundations and family foundations and community foundations. And when I talk to elected officials, many of them don't know the difference between a foundation and a nonprofit because that's not their world that they're spending time in. So I don't think there's a one-size legislative solution for the field, but I think within the field, we've got to build more of these tools and ideas of what best practices look like.
Does anyone else want to add before I go to the next question?
I would just say, you know, and I know understanding the power dynamic, between philanthropy and community, it's not going to happen a lot. But I, you know, even in former roles as a program officer, always appreciated when, you know, grantee partners or other community partners were able, you know, to take me to task or to ask me really hard questions. I think we've got to welcome that more. I mean, I really do look forward to the day when community takes philanthropy to task. You know, I wish we could fund it, but, you know, because I do think that, you know, community should be analyzing, you know, where grants are going, and asking the same questions of philanthropy that philanthropy is asking of community. And I would say, you know, folks have to release a certain level of documentation, and if that foundation is serving your community in the same way that you would do research before approaching them, you should take a look. And, you know, I actually think more folks would actually welcome some of those conversations. And, you know, the fact that we don't have any kind of feedback loop with the communities that we serve, formal feedback loops, I actually think does a disservice to the field. And so even the folks who we work with here at Converge, we constantly encourage folks to be critical, and critical because I think our field needs it. If people only tell us we're smart and pretty, right, we never grow. And so there is this blind spot that if folks do not hold us accountable or do not give feedback, then we're just really walking out there without a full sense of the context that we're working in.
Yeah, no, that's great. The only thing I would add, because I completely agree with what both Trista and Takema have said around funder peers and community accountability. Obviously, there's a role for program staff to play inside of our institutions. And again, going back to the importance of us having trusting relationships to the community and how that's reflected back in our work inside. But, you know, also there's an accountability that institutions need to have to themselves and of themselves related to their individual missions, and the realization that their missions are part of a much larger ecosystem, what have you, of other philanthropies with missions and strategies. And so I actually would call on institutional philanthropy to look beyond their individual missions and strategies and come to a table kind of unarmed with them and saying, like, look, this is our approach, this is what's working, maybe this is what's not working, and to hold themselves accountable to the sheer fact that some of these strategies may be helpful, but some may also be harmful. And so that's just another level. And I think it's going to actually take all of these mechanisms of accountability in order to actually make it work.
So another question for the audience, can any of you speak to an experience where you have shared your situational power? Takema?
So I try as much as possible, and I think the structure I was discussing earlier with the Greater New Orleans Funders Network is we tried to build a structure that has tiers of leadership within it. The network has grown from 10 foundations to 50 who are all investing in this region, and are investing around a myriad of things, right? And to sort of create space for a more sort of specific strategy and co-investing, we have multiple tables that people sit at. Each one of those tables is represented by 2 co-chairs. And this is really a space from which folks can lead in their expertise around the topic areas that we address. We also have, you know, the leadership at the steering committee level, and really all of these levels of leadership is what creates the architecture of the network. And so we've thought through that very intentionally what it means, particularly in our network as it relates to balancing power between local, regional, and national foundations, what it means to balance power as it relates to race and gender. And so as a woman, always am very mindful about positioning other women in leadership roles and allowing them to shine in those roles. And so it has been an on-the-table conversation from the beginning, and we're constantly looking for ways to rotate leadership and ways to sort of create space for folks to come up with their own, to use the platform from which to launch their own vision. I will say, you know, I have an awareness that the network creates cover for folks to do things that they can't do back in their own institutions. And so being really mindful of that. I'm also really mindful that some of the folks who lead in our network don't necessarily lead back at home in their organizations, right? And so I get an opportunity to promote their leadership and actually have their institution even see them differently. So just being really, really intentional and constantly thinking about who is representing us, who is speaking, and that we are a we, and we are seen as a we, and that it's never seen as Takema or Converge or one single entity, that this is really seen as multiple leaders who convene in this one space to move a single mission forward.
Thanks. Will, would you like to share something?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. And I have to say, I haven't had a whole lot of kind of really big opportunities to create spaces for situational power beyond kind of what we already know. So in a few previous jobs, we've been fortunate enough to have kind of a group of both grantee partners and thought leaders in the field who've been willing to come to the table and provide really candid feedback on our funding strategy. You know, and at a macro level, beyond getting into like the granular detail of a particular grant, but like, look, does this strategy make sense? Is it working? As someone who is out in leadership and in the field doing the actual work, are we completely off base? We've had that in kind of my two previous institutions, and something that we've talked about here as well. You know, another kind of space where I have gleaned from others really is to talk to my program associates or to research interns when I've been fortunate enough to have them, to say, hey, does this even make sense? Is this off base? So not only like kind of like trying to glean from them their analysis on a strategy or on a particular situation, but often, or it's not often, but sometimes deferring decision-making power to other members of program staff, right? Or to a program associate to run with a grant, and to kind of like harness their best thinking in a way that is good for the whole program. And so those have kind of been the spaces where it's happened for me. I welcome any and all opportunities to be challenged on that, and how we at Wellspring, as we come online with this new program, can create kind of a similar mechanism to share the power and to get kind of really honest feedback on our strategy as we emerge.
Thank you. So we have about 2 minutes left. I told you guys this hour is going to go really fast. So Trista, I'm going to give you 30 seconds if you have anything to share before we turn it over to Edgar to give us some final thoughts.
I'd just say ditto, and we have a saying within our organization of who's driving the bus. So it is, as somebody who leads this organization and then leads this community of grant makers, it is exhausting to be in charge all the time. And so I am always looking for opportunities to let other folks step up and get to be a passenger on the bus sometimes. So I think as you're feeling frustration within your organizations about ability to lead, sometimes your supervisor is just waiting for you to say, I will take that thing and I'll be responsible for it, and I will bring that deliverable forward to you. So try it out.
Thank you all so much for spending time with us today. Again, a fantastic conversation. Thanks to the audience of participants, those of you who shared questions, and we will turn it over to Edgar to offer final thoughts on behalf of SHOT Foundation.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone, Takema, Sana, Trista, Will, Toya, for putting this all together. I've been on the edge of my seat wanting to jump in to the conversation, but I appreciate hearing all of your perspectives. And I know we've had these conversations with some of us for a long time, and I'm glad we're bringing these into the spotlight. And I have full confidence in you all's ability to really work together to change this field. So thank you. I want to thank all of our participants today and invite you to follow SHOT on Twitter at SHOTFound, F-O-U-N-D, and to keep the conversation going there at #GrassrootsEd. This is a part of a series of conversations that we will continue to have over months to come about transforming philanthropy. And finally, on our website, I want to invite all of you to join the National Opportunity to Learn Network, which is a network of individuals and advocates who are working together to transform public education and fight for equity for our children. So thanks again, and we will talk with you all soon.